So yeah, I've been having this idea of how to activate our videos in a way that they remain as what they are, but they also have like a more accessible side of them for people who don't have 2 hours of their week to watch us rambling, which is very understandable. And I was thinking, what if at the end of each session we make an effort to do a 3-minute summary that can then sort of like be either a 3-minute summary of the session that precedes it, right? So that we can, you could start watching our videos, watching those 3 last minutes, and then watch the whole thing, or find a place in there that interests you. And they could also live as their own, right? Like as sort of like video notebook of our progress or of sorts, or as a series on its own. Maybe you can compile all of the summaries at the end and have like a mega edit of all of the summaries. I just find it like it could, yeah, we could distill our sessions into a small summary at the end, and that could be useful for modularity in many ways, right?
I think it's a good idea, and there is an easy way to do it. I mean, of course, like we can do it in this session, like what happens inside, but in terms of the broadcasting of it, we can do it as a timestamp because timestamp have their own links. So that's easy to do. Like I can check it quite easily where it is and just make a timestamp for it. So that could be a good start for it, like because then you can put in the description the summary link, and then yeah, like YouTube is even kind of pushing that. I think they're going to the direction that the timestamp links are functioning more and more like independent videos. But that's a topic for another group and another context. But and the reasons why they're doing it, but I won't go there. But yeah, I think like doing it, we can put it now as an experiment and do it, and then I can do it as a timestamp into the video. Like
yeah, and of course, I imagine we could even implement some game dynamics into that summary making. Maybe there's roles, maybe there's tokens, maybe like we could conceptualize it in various different ways. It could be like an interesting mini game inside of our long RPG.
I think, yeah, let's experiment with it. Like, so this is the start of it, and we can take it now as kind of like a like the first case, and take whatever ideas we have when the summary comes to implement it. But then it can change in the future iterations of it. Like, so that's a good possibility. It's okay. So we will do a summary, which of course now brought the people. But so maybe this leads us to also coming with a beginning. But now we sort of gave them a meta beginning, or in a sense that they know that there is a summary and there will be a link to a summary that there in the beginning. Now they can look for it. Okay, so it is a kind of a beginning at the end. Nevertheless, so that's a good point. Like and a good idea. Let's implement that. But yeah, so to throw some things into the pot now that we are a small group with potential new joiners, but maybe not. We can approach this loosely, and I can just put the ideas in the pot, and we can see what we do with them, but not to make a long topic out of them. But so I was kind of playing around with like let's call it like different perspectives, or you could also think of them as applications of the kind of techniques or structures that we have developed, and how there are different contexts that they could work in. And one of these contexts that came to my mind was in combination with this last week's topics, reality games, and kind of, in a way, building one bridge. There's multiple bridges, but one bridge between them. And maybe I'll actually also share the screen.
Yeah.
Mostly not because it's now super interesting immediate material, but start with this one. But it's a possibility of um, like I'm thinking of taking essentially real world contexts and playing a bit with them. So while the screen is not immediately directly of acuteness, it's still maybe more interesting than just the faces. So, but so in the sense of okay, like in the sense of finding like the sort of sense of how things are organized in the wild in quotation marks, like essentially things that are not necessarily considered so, or are considered so, but not acutely thought of as such. Like, for example, the image supermarket is certainly organized, but it's organized for some people. The other people utilize that organization, and they are like to some level consciously aware of that organization, certainly, but much of it is kind of subconscious. But you can also think of like many different possibilities, like let's say a view on the streets. Let's use them. I'm also um, playing with DuckDuckGo because it has a good
Yeah.
image search because it's so fast. Uh, uh, so like there is of course here like immediate known organization like the streets, the street system. But even that area, what is like known as organized, is kind of interesting because it's like if you start listing them, it's almost endless. Uh, like I could pick like I don't see a trash can, but if I think there is one, but nevertheless, like if I think how that's organized, um, like and then there comes this side of that there is this actually an interesting paradigm in the idea of a trash can, that when you put something in the trash can, it almost goes to another world, another
Yeah.
realm, like it's gone. And then like that realm is a distributed realm, or like one can think of it as distributed, that it exists in this realm that is addressed by people who collect the trash, like from these pockets that this realm exists.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a really interesting structure if you think about it in itself. Like you bypass this, usually not even a doorway, but just this like a gate by putting something in trash, and it generally changes. Like if it's in your hand, it's not culturally recognized as trash. You might think of it as trash. You put it in the trash can, it changes quality, and then it enters into another system. So even this like known as organized thing, if you start looking at it as organization, offers a lot of interesting angles. Um, Also for people who are not necessarily doing the or part of the garbage disposal organization, but as looking for how things are organized. But then, of course, like there's an endless stream of other possibilities. We can think about the organization of people as they're walking the streets. Like here we can see these sort of groupings, and we know a lot about this organization, but often semi-consciously. Is like if we actually start analyzing, like, are these people together? We often can say yes, and we were not aware of it before. And if we start analyzing why, we can come up with all kinds of reasons, but those reasons are not like from an existing analytic of concepts. Like we can say, well, because they're that close, and and also how much they look at each other and things like this, and this is all kind of uh, like combination of latent and conscious knowledge, which is a form of organization itself. But yeah, like this list could continue. Like you could go to and listen to conversations, and they have an organization, and then every conversation has a little bit of a different organization. And if you go to a shop and you listen to a conversation between the shopkeeper and a person going to the shop, you have another form of organization, and then you listen to the shopkeeper talking to a shop cashier, and it's another form of organization. On it goes.
Yeah.
But why would you do that? Well, the first thing, and why it took a bit of time with the trash garbage example is it actually gives a lot of richness.
Yeah.
It's not dry. It's actually very vivid and very versatile and colorful and varied form of things. And some of those things are almost like organizational raw material. Like if there was this super matter, like abstract matter called organization, I think one could even think about it as abstract matter, because like for example, this how the garbage or trash works as material, abstract material of organization is interesting, because you can think like, whoa, I could sculpt with that. Like what if there was another system that worked like this sort of distributed pocket dimension, like trash, where you change quality by entering its pockets? This is what the sculpting could be, for example. And you come to a kind of interesting possibilities, but then you could go around and listen to conversations. And what if I took this shopkeeper talking to customer and organized a conversation between friends utilizing this model or something of this model? And once again, it's certainly sculptable. So that's a like an intro for the direction, which I think is a good point to also stop rambling or having this monologue. But of course, there's more there, like and many directions to go to. But I'll stop now and give you a chance to speak.
Yeah, I mean, garbage is trash in general is hugely inspirational for me. So this is great. Like this is such a great example to pick. I think there's a lot of value in sort of doing I guess a process of anomaly mining into these wild organizations and identifying the modularity in their structures.
Yeah.
So that we can either extend them, plug it in somewhere else. Like I would totally see us doing a brainstorm on identifying those structures, right? And like compiling a list of like, okay, how is garbage and garbage collection an organization? And there's, I mean, I'm just thinking there's so many interesting things around it. Also in terms of economies, right?
Yes.
You have a change of ownership. When you put something in the garbage, probably it becomes public property because now it's under the domain of the garbage collection. You have a whole economy around recycling. So there's like pieces of garbage that hold a special economic value. Here in Germany, sort of like fund culture is such a thing, right? Getting the stuff in your place, taking it to the store, getting some credit from the store, people collecting bottles on the street. Like it is such a big thing.
Yeah, also those organizations.
Yeah, that is a very decentralized economy. Both of beer drinking on the street and people picking up those bottles, right? Like that's
and placing them underneath the garbage collection places in order for them to be collected.
Exactly. I actually saw a design for a garbage can, I believe in Canada, but I might be wrong about this, that has sort of like an extension around the garbage can where you're supposed to put the bottles so that it is easier for people to collect.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's so many. It's a huge design space,
Yeah.
largely abandoned to the realm of public policy development, which is extremely sad. And like, I cannot even imagine how much creativity has been lost in relegating that organization design to public service. Yeah, so yeah, very exciting thoughts.
Yeah, and it's also like really like as how to put it, like if one thinks about this as from this metaphor, like almost like pulling out organizational matter, like raw material, uh, in order to find other possibilities. Like this kind of material, like it's suggestive for other, uh, like it's one way to break oneself from organizational conventions. There's of course other ways, but it's like similarly, like okay, the garbage, like you actually said, like a good point on this, that the ownership of the object changes when it moves to trash. Of course, I translate it now to object rights. Not just for that, that's my habit, but it actually gets very interesting when you start think about it. Actually, yes, objects do have rights, which is first of all completely sensible, but then it turns it into an interesting question: is like what is the kind of change of rights that happens when they pass through that gate, and and um, and so I mean there is clearly like loss of like we can on the surface use the kind of loss of ownership, like in a way like you put it in the trash. There's a weird uh, I don't know, like a softness to that. Like somebody might start digging from the trash that hey, I lost my thing, and people might help because there's still a trace of it left. But generally, when it's there, and if there's no other knowledge, you have lost the ownership towards that. But
Yeah,
also the object rights are changed. Like if somebody finds a radio on like left in a park, then it's a question, okay, whose radio is this, and and like who has left this, etc. If they find a radio in the trash, well, some people might pick it and try to make it work, but generally it's taken that the object rights are now different. That
yeah,
radio doesn't have the rights to exist as radio. It doesn't have the right of intactness.
yeah. Is this lost, or is this public trash domain, right? In
Yeah,
the
yeah,
public trash domain, yeah.
yeah, and then like even the right of intactness is a kind of an interesting right because it's of course it's a descriptive mostly, but it does I think describe somewhat adequately this sort of quality that like what is for objects in general, that they have a certain level of right of intactness if they exist in the world, and then when they go to trash, that's one of the things that they lose. Um,
Yeah,
um, they become more uh, seen as material, especially in the times of recycling, more and more so. Um, uh, Either seen as kind of waste in a pure sense, or as material, but not as objects of like what they are.
absolutely. I read recently that it's probably very soon we're gonna cross the threshold where it will be more profitable to mine precious metals from e-waste than to mine them directly from earth for some specific rare earth materials, right? Like it
Yeah, this
becomes a
yeah,
resource,
it,
literally.
it's already happening. Like I've been like taking some quick tips on this, and it's already in development. Um, um, and of course, like in a way, it has existed. Like like the poor people in various places taking ships apart and so on. Like
Yeah,
it kind of has those elements in itself, but like uh, it's like hand-based mining almost. but like then like this now,
industrial scale.
yeah,
Yeah.
like it's coming to existence like a and of course now with the uh what's the word I'm looking for, but isn't there like the scarcity of processors and the materials for them, it's has kicked into a new gear like in the last couple of years. Yeah, so that's also a factor in itself. Yeah, like this. But then, if you would, for example, start, one could still use this picture from advertisement, which is,
Mm.
yeah, like if one just says to people advertisement, then they say like it can be taken as maybe a banal topic. But then, if you look at them, how they're organized, well, that sort of can be interesting actually. Like first of all, that there are these sort of like what is a billboard is this sort of like it's a point where a city starts to behave like a media surface, like a book,
Mm-hmm.
or not a point, an area really, but nevertheless, like so suddenly there is this quality, like here on the picture, on this like billboards on the pillars, that like at this point there is this change that it's more like a screen is or a page of a book is, but then there comes this organization around how that particular surface is treated, like what's on the page, what's on the screen thing itself. Um, and of course, then you can kind of take that apart and think like, okay, first of all, uh, how to expand or play around with this idea of this kind of surfaces in the city, uh, like beyond that, and then secondly, how to play with the governance of those surfaces,
Yeah.
perhaps in other forms, and that becomes a kind of interesting avenue. And then that also points out the close relative, which is the more informative screens, which are like the road signs
Yeah.
or street name signs, etc., which is like the city informing of its own usage. It's like it's really like close to a manual kind of instructions how to use the
Yeah.
city signs. Um, but it's a relative because it uses similarly like the surfaces that turn into media. Uh,
And then you have graffiti and tags and stickers as sort of like a third layer of urban surfaces as media.
yeah, and that is sort of like once again a relative, like maybe a sister, brother, or a cousin, or whatever of this media surfaces. That it's an opportunistical evaluation of uh, things that could behave like similar surfaces, like
Mm-hmm.
either being literal surfaces, having visibility, often important quality as well, but having visibility that is less administered or guarded, or um, and these kind of factors actually play and are evaluated in order to like organize this sort of anarchic or essentially like off law, outside of law uh, surfaces, which is graffiti posters that are not operated by the governance system connected to the city, etc.
Yeah.
So, but then like if one like looks at all that, like this is once again potential raw material. Like one can think of those kind of things like well, like one could plug in, like just to pick one. Okay, this is sort of like you could say kind of mindless. Like they're kind of neutral, these surfaces. I mean, you could say that the city instructions are not so mindless. They're more, but they have this sort of cohesive, like this is just instructions of how to use in local base. But the advertisements are sort of mindless in the sense that they don't really care about the surfaces combining, like having like a super system running through them. It's just like the only super system is selling them, etc. But there's no, for example, super system like a book would have a super system of telling its story, or a game would have a super system that is like how the parts combine and play together. So if you start like adding in like, okay, if there was such a super system, what could happen? And then that becomes an interesting possibility of such surfaces in and of itself.
Yeah, I guess there is a super system of market fragmentation, and where you decide to show each advertisement, of course, correlates to the income area, or the income of the people who frequent an area. Like, it is very visible. This Mexico City is like the level of, and here we connect both the world of advertisement and trash. The level of visual pollution is really high, and there's like giant billboards everywhere, and you can really tell how expensive stuff occupies either ground level at fancy neighborhoods, or high level at, for example, inner highways, right? Even if it's a poor neighborhood, but if it's a highway that connects rich neighborhoods, then you might have a high income advertisement on a poor neighborhood, because it's the people who transit that space. Yeah, I guess that's a super system.
Yeah, that is like, I think that's a fair point. Yeah, that super system does exist. Although, like, it's slightly different super system than, say, if it would be like a book or if it would be like a game, but nevertheless, it is another super system that is kind of still different from the governance. Of course, it kind of plays in collaboration or works in collaboration with the governance of it. Is because the governance selects like areas to sell and puts prices based on their kind of visibility and whatnot, and that sort of plays with that. But it's still definitely a super system. It's like it's
a market, not a narrative.
Yeah, it's a market, like, and it's a market based on it's an attention economy, to put it in blunt terms. Like, that it's based on attention economy analytics. Like, it's like, oh, who do we think that this will be seen by, and what are their social profiles and things like this, and how many.
I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if it's mostly algorithms determining where to show certain advertisements in the streets right now, particularly in places like New York and like high-profile spaces. Probably it's algorithm defining the prices, defining the how long should something stay, things like that.
Yeah, they probably do like both algorithms and data mining. Like I'm like in something like Times Square, there is certainly a camera somewhere or several which are essentially tracking the positions of people and then utilizing some filtering of being able to be knowledgeable when they're looking at the billboards, and then utilizing that data to kind of see like the billboard behaviors, like, because that's doable, and it would be very weird that they wouldn't do that in such a kind of like a central expensive spot. So yeah, like they're like, these kind of plays are a whole thing of their own. But then like also like still kind of sculpting from this raw material, like you can also move this organization to other contexts. Like, what if you move it to, say, inside of a home? Well, it's sort of like there is close relatives to it, like people keeping paintings on the wall, etc. But they're also a bit different. But like if one has such super system, well, of course, the easy thing is to think like, okay, it's like home advertisement, which is possible. But then it's also like, what if it's used for another kind of superstructure, like a game or a story or something else, in this sense, and what can be built out of this, which is an example of how, like, you have this pathway that you kind of extracted this in the wild organizational element I mean a known one, but you kind of it's extracted here in a particular manner that makes it sculptable, and then that sculpting enabling kind of thinking about applying it somewhere else, um, and then kind of coming up with new organizational forms. Like, okay, if one takes such surfaces, takes a place or a home, but one can easily imagine like a working place or an office or some workshop space, and then uh, plugs in a superstructure of, say, roughly speaking, game, what comes out, like what, like, and that's already an interesting area in itself. Like,
Yeah.
this is kind of what I was um, aiming towards with this topic in itself. Like that, I thought that this is essentially possible to do this, and that excavating or mining this sort of organizational material in itself is rather fertile. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think it would be very beneficial if we do these sort of like sessions of mining superstructure, no, mining wild organizations for some to extract the modules.
Mm.
I'm sort of like concerned or wondering what then becomes the container of them, or how are they organized, or how are they categorized, or like how does this mining becomes yeah, how does this wiki looks like, I guess
Ah,
it's my question.
but here comes the, was it the last sentence in the description somewhere there, is like,
Mm.
why then all the things that we have made, conceived, or the structures that we have made are then tools? Is because, like, I mean, we can easily see here, of course, scenes. We can also see types. Um, like, we can see certainly filter layers. Like for
Mm.
example, how is this? Uh, let's call it the surface for now. Like this advertisement surface, a filter layer, because it
Mm-hmm.
certainly is. Uh, like, what kind of scenes can be built out of it? Like, and then I can make like one potential scene would be to use the kind of normal senses. What is the scene of a normal advertisement? It's like, it's a sort of like it's an interesting scene. It's almost kind of related to, not to be too dramatic about it, but like it likens to in churches when you have like the stained glass or the crucifix in the middle,
Yeah.
in this sort of like point of high visibility, usually from up high, to create this sort of like trying to be a kind of constant presence, like an almost like unavoidable. Like, it doesn't necessarily go that far as the crucifix does, but it comes from the similar qualities. And that's sort of like, if you think like what is the role of the people, that it tracks quite similarly as the church crucifix scene or stained glass in the middle behind the altar kind of thing. So I mean, that spur of the moment making of like a scene and of it, but mostly also to create this sort of other way of looking at it. But and as an example of why, once one does mining, actually all these things we have made are kind of like, they're kind of like uh, maybe like peak access, but also the melting pots, or the places where you smelt the material that you have mined, or the filtering or refining tools, or molds where you cast that material, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that, uh, in a certain level, addresses your question, maybe not completely, but like, well, what to do with them. Like, for me, like, really here it's like, essentially, like, there's there's many other things, but just to kind of highlight that there is this interesting source of raw material, which is the finding them in the wild, and then this sort of extraction of them. Then
Yeah.
these tools and techniques are ways to mold and shape this raw material in itself. Like um, even in the earlier examples of moving the billboards or surfaces into the scene of a home, I was kind of using the scene already. I just didn't mention it because it was kind of like came natural, but it was kind of the same thing. I took that layer filter and put it in another scene and started from there. And so, like, in a way, I was already using the tools that we have created or the structures we have created as instruments of making that that context.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is also, I mean, these examples in a way like of our organizational architecture, but then the same richness exists also on the level of people.
Yeah.
I mean, they're kind of present already, like in the case of the advertisement and so on. But like this example of let's take the supermarket. I had, maybe this is too funny, but maybe it works because it also has a supermarket. But uh, so, but like if I take the concept of the role now, actually role analysis towards the supermarket is quite immediately useful. Of course, it brings a lot of things that are known. Like you have like, okay, you have like customers and workers. That's an easy one. And then you have like inside the workers, you have whole logistics of different roles. Like you have the overseer, you have the cashiers, you have the shelf fillers,
Yeah.
and you have variants and hybrids of that. Um, and and you might have like even different roles for the customers. But of course, you can imagine using those or even beyond those. Like you can think of roles that are actually not there. Once again, using our tools, like let's put a role that, what is a role of an observer in a supermarket? Like, of course, one could go that it's some researcher, but you could just make an observer that is not there to buy, and that creates a new uh, like a fictional way of behavior, like that could be
Mm-hmm.
thought in this sense. Um, Another way would be taking some of these role structures, like the shelf stuffers, and also like shelf monitors, which is like people going around and like looking at the stuff and so on, and then put them in another scene or even another setting in a way, like how could you use this sort of role divisions in other places, like um, what if, okay, let's put this just as an example, what if there was a work in the widest sense, like an artwork, whatever, that functions like a supermarket, and
Mm-hmm.
that it's actually consists of many different pieces organized, um, and then uh, part of that work and its life cycle or metabolism is people working upon it. So that uh, both in terms of taking from it and putting into it. But now, of course, one can take the leeway because it's a completely new thing of kind of mutating what is a shelf stuffer or shelf maintainer. And that becomes a kind of interesting structure or possibility. And also kind of interesting way of maybe modifying it from the roles forward, for example.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, like this is really an example of that modularity approach, right? And
Yeah,
sort of like
exactly.
recontextualizing certain elements.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And why the modularity is powerful, because it starts to, it really allows you to move outside of the conventions. Like much of the organizational thinking still has this, like there's a lot of variance and richness in a way, like supermarket is different from I don't know, like even a hardware store or a cafe or something. But
Yeah.
they come in this sort of monoliths in a way. But immediately when you start breaking it, that actually there's an interesting array of roles, and if we just mutate that role, then we have a different behavioral pattern, almost like a egregore of the supermarket staff. But now we have mutated it, and where does it go? What kind of context could it serve and create even? And now we are into unconventional territory immediately.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm having very stupid ideas. For example,
Do
what if
tell.
there's a role? I just think the the cart, the supermarket cart, is just so provocative and such an iconic piece of hardware mobility. What if you have a role where someone is just supposed to assemble their own card from what other people put in their cards? So then you're also taking away from other people, right? And the objects, when they're in the card, they're in this weird ownership limbo. You have
Yeah,
not yet paid for them, right? So it's
yeah,
not yours. It's still kind of the supermarket, but you already sort of selected it. So it's under your control.
yeah,
But nevertheless, one could just go and pick stuff from other people's card. It would be annoying, but there's probably an argument to be made that the stuff is not yet yours.
yeah.
So I just had this very stupid idea.
No, it's actually a really great, also a kind of continuation to this object rights, because it's another weird specimen of it. Because, like, I mean, it's a very real thing. Like, let's say you go and take something out of somebody else's cart, and that person sees them, and compare that you take something out of when they're packing it into their car after they bought them. That
Yeah,
same thing, completely
legal
different.
consequences are very
Yeah,
different.
completely different. And like the
Yes.
person is annoyed with you, probably doesn't even kind of bother to raise the issue with the staff. If you're taking from the cart, they're like, "Hey, get your own," something
Yeah.
like this. And whereas if you take it from the car, it's a crime. And
Yes.
like, so like, so what is this ownership? Like, because it's not nothing, or what is this object rights in the uh, and it's an interest. Like I can kind of to put a sketch analysis. It's a if labor was energy, which it kind of is, and if it could charge objects like a battery, then the labor of actually getting the stuff itself is a good indicator of the value of that. It's the energy charge to that object that kind of creates the charge of the annoyance of it.
Yeah.
Like if somebody would take, let's say you see somebody taking an item from your cart, but that item is available right next to your cart, you probably, maybe you give them a look, but you just pick the item again. If you they take an item that is kind of way far off, you certainly feel more annoyed. Why? Because it's the labor as kind of energy indicator. Like you're asked to do labor, and the taking of it is kind of um, uh, taking away your labor or forcing you to do more labor for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, um, which is then different in kind for the object that's taken out of the car, because that is taking monetary value.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Consequences are very different.
Yeah.
One of them is criminal, and the other is sort of good manners.
Mm.
I would say. Yeah, they fall into different superstructures. But yeah, maybe this is like a form for like a supermarket enemy, if the in the supermarket video game, right?
Mm.
Just like a low tier enemy that just steals stuff. I don't know if steal is the word, from other people's cards. So maybe you have to be attentive to your cart. I very often just leave my cart, go get stuff, and then come back, because just moving around is so stupid that
Mm.
I am one of those lever, go get something, come back. So I would be very much affected by this type of supermarket enemy.
But this also opens like if one think of expands around the paradigm of the card and the operative nature of the card as like card as a creative structure operator, either or. Um, um, so so what kind of things one can imagine around the card itself? Like for example, of course, like in websites there is a skeuomorphic
Yeah.
version of cards,
Yeah.
like in Amazon or whatever. Like it's a skeuomorphic card structure called basket, but same thing. But it's skeuomorphic, so it's also slightly different. Um, but then, like that, it's actually kind of not trying to be creative. It's trying to both copy and then be efficient.
Mhm.
But what if you turn it into a creative question? Like, what is an approach to a work in the wider sense, where the approach is not just to consume it, but actually collect it, and how that collection could work in mutated ways from the card itself. Like the card has the sense of like you collect it in like not necessarily in an order. Well, actually, there's a lot of interesting structures here. It's proving this concept works or this one. Okay, well, just shortly. So in the card supermarket, there is a structure of there is no order set on how you pick them, but there is an
Mhm.
organizational question. You're left freely to decide that organization, but usually you organize them somehow in your card. Maybe
Mhm.
super loosely, maybe not. But but that just opens this possibility that you're organizing the card itself. But once you take it to the cashier, you put them in a serialization. Now, usually this is not a big deal. I mean, some people do it in functional that I put the heavy stuff first because then I can pack them first, whatever. But it's still a serialization. That is an interesting combination now that we have created an area, then we created this vehicle of storage. Then we created this potential organization, but loosely not in order, which then turns to order, which turns to the ritual of each one checked in order, which is suggested to the cashier, but the cashier has some leeway because they can pick them in slightly different order, which then collects to a bundle again, to which you then pack. It's a highly interesting structure in itself as a structure, and immediately opens itself to kind of many mutations. Like for example, what if you would make like the use this as a basis of experience? Like if one says like say watching a film or a theater piece, the experience is simply taking it in and collecting or organizing your thoughts by it, which is also a form of organization. What if there is this sort of other element that is kind of that you're concretely taking pieces from it, and then you take some elements from this supermarket cart or mutations from it? What could you do with that? I think quite
Yeah.
many things. It's suggesting many kind of interesting cultural formats
Yeah. It's
or knowledge.
a collection. I mean, yeah, a collection device or a
Yeah.
device that aids in collection. It's sort of like inventory management in its quintessential form, kind of.
Yes. Yes, it
Sort of
is.
like,
Yeah. Primal
yeah,
also.
very primal.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I guess next to like packing stuff for a trip, it is like the moment where we are engaging with inventories the most, or in a very maybe no, maybe it's the best example of inventory making in the
Mm.
real world.
Mm.
Yeah, the cart and the cart itself, it's such a peculiar configuration, right? You have those that you have to like put a coin to get it. I hate those.
Mm.
Sort of like that's what kind of they hold your money hostage
Mm.
for the time being, and then you get it back. It's such a weird thing. You could even probably generate interest on that money that you're not using at that
Mm.
time, a few microcents. Then there's like how they are configured or created or designed in spatial terms to fit in, so that two can always fit back and forth. So there's always a possibility of like encountering someone. There's one that you can fit a kid in it. Kids become observers of the whole situation. There's the space below to put the milk carton. That's crazy. They always have one wheel that is a bit weirder than the others. Great devices.
Like potential vehicle, like the kids are turning it into almost like a car or a pushable thing in itself. It's and this whole, like, first of all, that inventory, like one of my favorite examples of etymology is that the word inventory and the word invent have the same root for a reason, because like the meaning of the concept of inventory, I think I've told this at one point, but it's probably a while ago, but it's because the inventory actually was connected to invent in the 600 to 1000-ish monastery culture and their relation to memory and their paradigm of memory as like remembering as invention, the combination of remembering being the source of invention and the remembering being actually organizing your thoughts, therefore inventory.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's
so
incredible.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting culture. It has one of the, I think, most like paradigms that we really should bring back towards reading, etc. Very radical for our age, kind of things. But that's where the connection comes from. But that's a sort of an interesting point, while a side point, but could be useful. Also, if you would play with this, I think it's rather interesting element of this, that you collect something because it's a form of activity, and it's a one way to kind of, let's say, compare to a so-called passive media, like you're just watching and organizing your thoughts, which is of course not really passive, like you're still a bit active in your mind, but nevertheless, like, it's different, that you're actually walking around kind of like a gallery, but then in that gallery you're picking things and putting them in, which is certainly more active than a gallery. And then it opens this possibility of organization. And then you turn it into a representation, which is that you put them in a sequential order. Like there's certainly like interesting forms that can come from this possibility. Like in a way, an easy example would be like you essentially tell your story, which is the sequentialization.
Collection and then sequentialization.
And you could definitely make some interesting forms out of that. So you're combining the paradigm of sort of a gallery, but you're changing the interaction paradigm to collection and then turning your own story. And suddenly, by that change of organization, you have an interesting root branch for, yes, art forms, but of course could be knowledge forms as well. Like knowledge or art interaction patterns. Like if there was a pattern language, now this is clearly a pattern already. Like a pattern that in a way does exist in supermarkets, but it's one of these sort of like semi-conscious things. Or I mean, there are people who do a lot of analysis on the supermarket side of it, and we know it very well because we do it all the time, but we are not so conscious that we would, for example, just make this because it's kind of trapped in the convention. We don't have the modularity normally towards it.
I mean, it just came to my mind how sort of like the music making process works for me, how I just like open a file in the software and just like make stuff until I have enough stuff that is interesting, that sort of feels like a it is a creative process, but feels like a collection. I'm browsing instruments, I'm browsing plugins, I'm playing around and collecting these clips. And then comes a process of sequentialization, right? Of bringing that to an arrangement view where things become a narrative. So you have this pattern very clearly in sort of like at least one way of making music with software. So yeah, I am sure this is a pattern that repeats a lot. Editing a movie has this thing as well. Collecting material, videographic material, and then sequence it. Like yeah, it's a very common in creative processes.
There's also one paradigm that is actually huge but hasn't been mentioned here, and that is categorization. That is, the gallery in itself is actually an extremely complex take on categorization because it's utilizing multiple approaches to categorization at the same time. Like, for example, we can even see it here, like what is the vegetables, fruits categorization is follows sort of similar patterns but has its own pattern compared to the others. And then there are different factors that affect categorization. Like, for example, visibility is treated differently in different places, and it's a big factor. Like, in addition to how the categories are placed, there's also how they look. Uh, uh, like So there is like really this sort of calorie paradigm meeting a categorization paradigm, meeting a collection paradigm, meeting a serialization paradigm. Uh, uh, and that's just the normal supermarket.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like a very, or I think that I have reflected upon in terms of categorization in supermarkets in Germany, where there's of course like these sections of non-German food, right? There's very often sort of like a Turkish section, which can sort of expand into a more broad Middle Eastern understanding, like Western understanding of food and products. Then there's of course the East Asia section, and then there's sometimes even like a Tex-Mex Mexican section, right?
Yeah.
But if the supermarket is small, they start to be packed into like a exotic food category or like a which is hilarious because it really depends on like the surface area, the square meters of the supermarket, whether these are understood as distinct food cultures or clumped up into a kind of like world music category, which is hilarious and really it's just something that came to my mind right now.
Yeah, and this is like a really big can of worms, but just to kind of pick a couple of things here. There's also, of course, like seasonal categorization, Russia weeks or whatever. Probably not Russia weeks now, but like like but similar things like. But then I'm highly fascinated by the cycling multi-cycling categorization you see in shops like Lidl, and like the certain archetype of a German supermarket, which has this sort of like it it actually has like multiple different places with different sense of cycling that is contrasted with things that are staple, like staple and stable, like both words apply. But then the part of the supermarket's functionality is precisely this sort of like different areas, like there are things on sale. There is a kind of thematic area. There's actually like 3 or 4 or 5 in a small, even like an average size Lidl, of different kind of more temporal patterning things that serve different purposes, and they're all about the psychology of refreshment that works with this. Like, the whole thing is made to play that there are these staples which you get every time, but if you would only have the staples to which people actually want, there would be this sort of less reason to visit, and there is a kind of refreshment of the visit of what do they have now, which is then served by all these different cycling routers of places. And that's all in the categorization. It's a highly thought out system that is just utterly fascinating. But yeah, like it's a big can of worms. This sort of like a like a like a clockwork of categorization.
Yeah.
So and that all plays with this. Like so yeah, it's like, I mean, even this is a great example because it really can be played with, like, for example, from this point of view of the card and the environment that the card lives in, the supermarket, or has a role in, uh, because also items have roles. Like it's a functional role, but certainly a role kind of thing. I mean, you can make it into other things, but it's certainly like a role is one useful thing to think about it as well, because it's like it opens this sort of layer of operationality, and there the card has an operative role, and then like you can look from that layer also the whole layout of this categorization, how it works with the card. And yeah, well, that's one possibility, etc. But yeah, like but to put that kind of worms to the side, just to say, like, just starting from this card, you come to this sort of highly rich, highly varied, highly complex presence of organization, which we are interestingly like in this sort of moderate awareness of, like, but then really like once you start to make it modular, it starts to open this sort of potential versatility of like it's like, yeah, getting very complex material, like
Yeah.
like you would, like if you were a sculptor and you would get this really interesting, sometimes shiny and having joints kind of, and you would start thinking, what could I do with this kind of a thing? So, but but I mean, earlier we were in advertisement, and whole completely other things came from there, and then we were earlier in trash, and completely other things came from there, and
Yeah.
and this would just continue. Like as a side point, there was this, like, what if you would take conversational models from these different roles of interaction, like the storekeeper and the shelf stuffer, but also the shelf maintainer, the shelf stuffer, like what kind of conversational patterns you have there, and could you do something else with them, um, or like, and then you could think of any other similar roles, like what is a like conversation between like, I don't know, like could be a street sweeper. Well, they can be alone, but let's say police officers to each other, uh, to info desks,
Yeah.
and what you could do with an info desk. What if you start to be, and you take the role of an info desk and you mutate it to your friends, but you pick a topic, so it's something that they can call upon. They can spawn it at any point, and if they pick this topic, then you turn into the role of the info desk.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like there's so much to play with, like this kind of things.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think. I mean, I don't know. Should we? There's like one can of worms that maybe we can
You say,
briefly touch upon. Yeah. There's this. Going back to the supermarket. This, and I assume this is gonna be hugely of great interest to you. The whole payback point system. How aware are you of that? Yeah.
yeah, like, I mean, there are different ones, but I'm
Yeah.
generally aware. But like, I know there's also a lot of variants in this.
It is interconnected with like also temporal opportunities of like making something cheaper for a while. How is that called? Like an action. How is that
Sale,
called in English? Yeah, sale.
sale.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like with temporary sales, but then in the payback points app, you're like, this week vegetables give you more points. This week, whatever shampoo you can get two for the price, two for the price of one. These types of things, and it sort of like ties you as a consumer into the supermarket's inner organization and economy, so that they get to dispose of the products that they have too much of, or that they, for some reason, need to get rid of this thing or that thing. There's probably like insane amount of data going into creating this sort of like opportunities and sale opportunities. And it really, you become intertwined into the supermarket. I very often buy the things that are on sale, right? If there's the ham I normally buy and there's another ham that is on sale, I will get that one, most probably, right? So then it also becomes like a behavior, it changes your behavior, and therefore your like eating patterns in this case, which is a huge thing. So probably that should, we should aim for the democratization of those processes, because it's like such a huge thing. So that is one kind of worms that we could also mine as for like patterns of membership models and microeconomies, and that's really interesting. And the other thing, sort of like that I wanted to say, aiming more towards the structure of this session today, is that in my view this became mining of patterns of the supermarket, kind of.
I think one of the reasons was, like, in a way, like it was the main topic. But before that, there was the advertisement or billboards, and then there was the trash. But it's also because the supermarket is so vast and complex in its organizations when it starts to open like this. Like it just like kept on opening possibilities. But it's mostly, for me, it's a question of like kind of what's the like proving the concept in a way, like that this kind of mining works, that the richness comes out, because it did come out of the advertisement, or it did come out of the trash as well, and it would come out of other things. Now, supermarket is one of the more complex things in human culture, like, which is just true. But so I don't think it comes from every source in the same extent. But mostly it's because there is so much to mine in the supermarket system and so many subsystems. But the key thing here, like for me, like really the topic is, I would say, like it's more this approach. I mean, the supermarket is exemplifying the approach. And certainly, like the things coming out of the supermarket analysis are also useful and important in a way, but they're kind of proving the approach itself. And I think like one thing that could come out of from there is like in a way, like the tools that we have are, you could almost say, post-processing from the mining. Like I'm talking about the rolls and the seeds and things like this. Although they can be used also for the mining, like in a way, like you can like look at these things in like using them, and like they will extract different things. But there are also, I think, other filters in this mining, or like other operations that are not quite conceptualized or not present, and that's an interesting question in itself. Like I think partly this mining is like currently happening because you could say almost like training, and the training being XORG itself. Like if this was the beginning of XORG and we would be talking about this, it would be much less effective, I would surmise to say. Uh, but still, like I think like one could kind of figure out also like what's happening on the filter level, like in this mining itself. And this is why this sort of organization in the wild is an interesting concept. It's clear that one of these unshackling things is modularization in
Yes.
a very wide sense. It's this sort of like potential to take an element out and
Yeah.
and look at it by itself, but also kind of modify it and put it in another context.
Mm-hmm. Which
But
relates to pattern recognition. Like
yes,
how does this is a pattern? What sort of like happens in it, and how does it fit? How is it able to how to make it generic in a way so that you can exchange it in other circumstances, right?
yeah,
Or yeah.
like one of the concepts from the palette that hasn't been mentioned, but it's actually constantly present, is kind of like this, and it's actually sort of fitting. It's this sort of sense of ops, which was this sort of like, well, rules, of course, but at the same time, how every description or definition is already kind of setting rules. That there's this wider sense of like how everything can be rules, uh, because like in a way, like if you make an ops analysis, you come to make different operations out of these interactions that are dotted here, and then you can modularize those interactions, like for example collecting. But then you can say, okay, what kind of collecting? Or it's collecting in the scene of this gallery slash categorization that is the supermarket, and and um, and and then like that's a useful avenue to it. But I do think there are some other things that haven't really been uh, formulated yet as well as they could, like in this analysis as well.
Yeah. Yeah, but this is great. Should we, I mean, this was already sort of like a summary, I would say, like this previous 5 minutes or so, but should we attempt at a summary?
I think we should attempt a real summary, and so and this sets up a moment of summary. And to start it, I'll change the picture because now I can see it in the video. Uh, to scroll into the time slot of it. So a summary. Now, like to propose some rules for a summary as complete experiment is like, what if we both do a short summary of our own, like
Mm-hmm.
from our each of our sides, and like keep it short, and we'll see what we have after that. You
Yeah,
want to
sounds
start?
good.
Yeah,
Should I start?
whichever. Like if you want to start, you can.
Yeah, I think I can. Okay, so I would say the driving force of this session was trying to identify wild organizations in the wild, things that are organizations, and try to identify patterns in those organizations and maybe aspire to make modules out of those patterns that can later be used in other ways. A highlight for me was the thing you shared about inventories and invention, sharing etymological root, and yeah, how does that relate to memory and creativity? Some interesting patterns that we identified, mostly while in the supermarket realm, are collection, sequentialization, categorization, the supermarket cart, um, and yeah, I'll stop right there.
Yeah, I'll make a summary that tries to kind of or continue from what you already said and add to it. So I would say structurally we used loosely material like real world examples essentially. Like for example, picking advertisement or the system of trash or supermarkets or carts in the supermarket in and of itself. And then the techniques applied allowed for this sort of like various pieces of them extricated, turned into potentially more generalized interactions, for example, or generalized scenes, and looking at this as kind of things that can be located in other contexts, which I think in itself was like an operation that had a lot of power in it, uh, and proved again and again that it unshackles what is conventional and moves it into both kind of wider applicability, but immediately into a kind of unconventional space, because it quite naturally leads to structures that don't exist and have this sort of sense of potential organization, but an organization often that does not really exist as is in the world, and therefore opens up other avenues. And there was a kind of interesting presence throughout of like how organization, like metaphorically, but still kind of substantively uh, resembles a kind of like almost like an abstract matter or material that you can kind of utilize it almost to sculpt and mold new forms. And while it is metaphoric, like, yeah, there is this resemblance. Such a thing happened time and again through the session and became enablement of new structure in itself. In terms of what to do with this, then comes all the other structures that we have developed in the earlier sessions. But beyond that, I think there is still something new to learn in the kind of extrication process itself, like, because it's clearly rich material, and it's also clear that in a way, like, this extrication enriches them by making them unconventional. But like how to kind of formulate or systemize that extraction is still has still some things to be figured out.
Yep. Very good.
Anything else that we want to raise? I think I made a second rule for myself that I would add like key concepts or put them in. And I was thinking that there could be this sort of key concepts list in the end, but I think now it would be just repetition because they kind of were put in by both of us.
But okay, so I guess the summary ends here, and we can now either, I guess, stop recording and then we can comment on the summary exercise, or should this be included in the recording?
Yes. Okay. So as the summary ends, we shall stop sharing. I will try to reboot my camera. That, yes, still works. And then I will say goodbye to the potential people and stop the recording.